For starters, I'm 24 years old, female, and I've lived all around the US for the past 7 or so years. My parents split when I was really little, so I've mainly just been moving around with my dad. Well, he passed away back when I was 20 years old, so it's pretty much just been me on my own. And one thing that's really helped me deal with the loss of him and my mother is spending time out in the woods and enjoying nature, solo camping, solo hiking. While a lot of my peers my age are busy in college, dealing with stressful relationships, jobs they hate, I'm what you would call a vagabond. Not exactly homeless, although I do couch surf quite a bit from time to time. Fortunately, I have very good friends whom I call and refer to as my family. But that's not why I'm writing this. Just this last summer, in 2022, I was spending quite a bit of my time out in the Appalachian mountains, doing some soul-searching, trying to find myself, and centering my soul within nature itself. And while all that is good and dandy, it's what happened while I was out in the middle of nowhere that has still left me unable to venture off too far, at least for now. The TLDR of the whole thing is, I stumbled upon a den of some kind, and I believe, for a short time, I was being hunted, or at least driven out of the area, by whatever it is lived in that den. If I had to guess, I'd say I was roughly 8 to 10 miles off any near trail, which is pretty far out in the woods for most hikers and adventurers. I had set up camp near a small stream, so I had plenty of water, I had plenty of snacks, and I was even setting up my own traps, and I was doing just fine. Well, on one of the days, I got the hair to decide to go and explore a little further. I'd say no more than half a mile to 3/4 of a mile away from my camp was this sort of valley, I guess you can call it. While hiking in, I saw quite a few large bucks bedding down in this area, several does as well. I figured this would be a great area to find any deer sheddings I could get a hold of, since I love collecting them. This is probably where I should have picked up on my instinct that something was wrong. Upon only coming in here a few days ago, there were a lot of deer. Now, it was completely empty, desolate of almost any animal life, or so that I sensed and saw. However, in that moment, I didn't think it was really too strange, considering most animals do migrate through certain areas to follow food and whatnot, so I just went on my merry way looking for any sheddings I could find. Now, as I'm doing this, searching in this small valley, I began to get this strange sensation over me. It was like my gut instinct was screaming at me to get out of the area, to leave, that I was in danger. But looking around, I didn't see anything. I didn't sense that I was being followed or stalked by a cougar or a bear, so I just ignored it and kept searching. Now, as I went further down into the valley, there's a part that it's not exactly a cliff, but it kind of dips down a little bit, and this is where I found a rather large opening into what I can only assume was a den based upon what I found. Now, the hole in the ground, or I should say this 90-degree hole, was roughly about 6 by 6. Not a perfect circle, but almost very close to it. Something had clearly burrowed this hole, and when I say it was about 6 feet high by about 6 feet wide, I don't know of any animal, not even a bear, that creates an opening this large. I was curious, and against my better judgment, actually was able to fully, without crouching or getting down, walk into this large den. Now, this wasn't a cave like many bears will do. This was actually dug out, completely under the ground. You could even see tree roots hanging in one of the corners. If I had to give an actual estimation of how big this chamber was, I'd say probably maybe 15 or 20 feet in length and maybe no more than 6 to 7 feet in height. The entire den reeked like blood, urine, and wet dog. As I shone my light around closer to the corner of the den, I saw what appeared to be several large deer carcasses that looked to be almost completely intact, or at least the skeletal frame, but you could tell it had been eaten on. And there were also other miscellaneous skulls. It looked like just a bunch of deer skulls, honestly. And as soon as I kind of crawled down into this den, probably really going no more than a few feet in just to make an observation, I just got this feeling that I should not be in here and I need to get out now. So instead of exploring further, which I would have loved to do, I just decided to crawl out, crawl up the little incline, and try to move my way out of the valley. Now, as I'm doing this, as I'm exiting this den, immediately I noticed that the forest was even more quiet than it was before. I mean, I've been in the woods many times. I've spent hours upon hours on trails and going through the woods, and I've never experienced the woods so quiet before. It was as if all sound around me had completely stopped. I could have sneezed, and you would have heard it for miles. The sensation down inside my body wasn't that of being watched or followed or stalked. It was more just a burning sensation, as if my entire being was screaming at me to get to safety now because things were about to get bad. Now, this time I did listen to my instinct, and I assumed that the den I had found, or whatever was bedding down in there, was probably a large bear, or maybe a den of cougars or something. I mean, clearly something had been dragging fairly large kills down in there. I mean, the complete skeletons I saw were pretty large bucks, so something was pulling something down in there. I'm not too educated on how cougars or bears drag their kills or what they do with them, but it just wasn't sitting right with me. So as I'm climbing my way out of the valley to get to part of the ridge line, I begin to hear sounds in the woods around me, as if something really big is moving in my direction. Now, I can't really tell 4 legs, 2 legs, none of that, like you tell a lot in your stories, but I could tell that whatever it was very large by the size and weight and how it was stepping on the ground, and it was breaking brush and moving quickly in my direction. Without hesitating, I upped my speed by like 2 or 3, moving quickly back to camp. In hindsight, this was probably a terrible idea because I believe that I led this animal or these animals to my campsite. Now, it took me probably about 30 minutes or so to get back to where I was camping, just because I took the long way around, which didn't have as much dense foliage as the way I took in. And it sounded like whatever was following me was not following me with the intent of hunting me, but following me with the intent of keeping hidden, just enough far back so that way I wouldn't see anything, but yet that it could keep tabs on me. Now, I'm not a biologist or a wildlife expert, but I almost am certain that cougars and bears, which both hunt, don't do that level of hunting. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I could very well be wrong, but I've never had that feeling in my gut before. As a matter of fact, I've ran into a very large black bear, a mama black bear with 2 cubs, and even that encounter wasn't as terrifying. I've been stalked by a very large cougar back when I was in Arizona at one point. That's another story for another time. And again, I didn't really remember the same behavior, at least not as menacing feeling. But once I made it back to camp, I tried to calm myself down and just spend the rest of the day hanging out by the stream. Fortunately, at some point, it seemed like the sounds of the forest kind of came back alive, and the unsettling feeling seemed to die down after a while. I decided it was best to not really venture back to that valley again after that. Now, fast forward to that night, and it seemed like the forest would come alive with these strange howling, growling sounds. I can't really go into detail about what it sounded like because it was unlike anything I've ever heard. It definitely left me unsettled, and I could have sworn that there were times in the night where I heard large animals approaching my campsite, or at least just by the tree line. But I can't say for sure. I also have no proof because there was a lot of moss on that area of the ground where I was hearing these noises, and so there's really no way to tell. You can imagine my sleep that night was very little, and so the following morning, I figured that it was probably best that I moved to another area west of where I was. And as I'm getting at my things, which is just a one-man tent and some cooking supplies, I noticed there were these really large three-toed tracks right around my campsite. In fact, the closest one I'd probably say was no more than 15 feet, but no closer than roughly 9 or 10 feet away from my tent. Now, I only saw the one print, and then I saw a few smaller ones away closer on the other side of the trees or right by it where it turns to dirt near the creek. Now, I have no idea if this print that I saw had anything at all to do with what I had heard or encountered the day before, or if I was dealing with something, but as I looked at the print, it was pretty large, far larger than my hand, but did not appear to be from a bear or a cat or anything that I'm familiar with, and the indentation was at least half an inch to an inch deep in the mud. Kind of startling, to say the least. All I knew is that I would probably be wise to pack up my stuff and move really quickly west. So that's exactly what I did. And I hiked for probably about 4 to 5 more miles until the afternoon when I had felt securely safe from that previous camping spot. Now I was kind of up on this small bluff overlooking the forest below. Just like the day before, I decided to take the rest of the afternoon and evening off, just relaxing, filling my canteen, getting water, and just trying to, I don't want to say recover, but calm myself and calm my nerves down from the previous day's adventures. Now, once night hit, the forest erupted with all sorts of noises, specifically that same growling and roaring sound that I had heard the previous night. Only this time, it sounded closer, like it was within a few hundred yards, where the previous night, it sounded like it was much further away, and there were multiple of these. Now, I know I'm using the words roar and growl here, and I wish I could attribute these noises to some known animal like a bear or a wolf, but truth be told, I can't exactly place what noises these were, because I've never heard a noise like this. In fact, I can't even think of you to jump on YouTube and look for a specific noise because it doesn't match anything I even know. What I can tell you is that when I heard these noises, it definitely soured my stomach. It felt like whatever den I had stumbled upon the other day, that it was these animals, these large predators were bedding down and eating and living in that den. And these noises went on till probably 1, 2, maybe 3 in the morning. It was nearly almost all night long. At this time, I actually didn't have a phone with me at all, just a watch and a GPS, so that's kind of how I made my way around and got to and from trails. And I surprisingly only got a little bit of sleep that night, if any at all. So the following morning, I got up bright and early, and I decided it was safe to make my way to the nearest trail and try to hitch a ride to one of my friends' places. Now, I will say this, and this I thought was probably the strangest thing out of everything I've told you about. The next morning, it only took me probably about 3 hours to make it to one of the nearby trails, and I followed it all the way down to one of the parking areas. And this is where I was fortunate enough, or unfortunate, I guess, depending on how you look at it, to speak to a ranger who was working in and around the area. And she was very sweet to me, very kind. She had asked what I was doing, where I was going, if I'm okay, did I need anything. And her and I were just chatting, and I was kind of telling her my life story, which she thought was very interesting. And then I started telling her the same story I just wrote you. And immediately, as I'm telling her about the den and the sounds and stuff I heard, I could see her face go from interested to almost pain. And not pain in a emotional or physical sense, but pain as if she was almost wincing, like she knew something she couldn't quite say, but I could see that she really wanted to say something. And I could visibly see her holding back her tongue, at least she wore that expression on her face, and she began to tell me, almost in the slyest way possible, that area where I was just at, is not really advised that I go solo hiking down it, and that it can be extremely dangerous. In fact, in the past 6 months alone, they had 3 hikers go missing while also solo hiking in that same area. They were never found. Now, the feeling I got, you know how when you have conversations with people, you can kind of just read their body language, their emotions? Well, the gist I got from it is that she was definitely holding back information that I think she knew, and she tried to water it down by telling me that it's probably not safe. Now, I didn't go into detail about the footprint that I saw, the prints by the tree, or the level of growling and sounds that I had heard, just pretty much a quick, digestible version of what I already told you. Either way, it was more her reaction and all the things she did not tell me is what really left me unsettled. Now, after we had our discussion, we parted ways, we said our goodbyes. I was able to successfully borrow someone's phone, called a friend, hitched a ride, went and spent time at their place, and I figured I would use that time to try and research, if at all anything, what I experienced. I've told my friend that same story, and she thought it was pretty unsettling. She even helped me do some research, and kind of looking around on Reddit and Google, I came across a few things that seemed to point to more towards fictional things, like the supernatural or I guess what some people are calling a dogman. Now, before I go further, I just want to say that I am not a monster in the woods kind of girl. I never have been into that. I've always thought that was completely ridiculous and not even believable with an ounce of truth. And I can't say for certain that the things I experienced really necessarily match up to what people were claiming that I saw. It definitely feels like it was out of the ordinary. And it wasn't something that I or others would consider normal. Hey, perhaps it really was a bear. Perhaps it was a cougar or maybe a pack of large wolves. I don't know. But all I can say is it definitely was different than any other time I've been out in the woods. It disturbed me and it left me unsettled, so much so that it actually stopped me venturing out in the woods for a while. And as even now in 2023, I still am a little apprehensive to go too far off the trail, just in case my life might be in danger, like it could have been that day.